Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles podcast on Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, and other wonderful platforms. I'm also the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. To give a little bit of context to often the discussions that I have, I'll give a little bit of color in terms of who we are so it can help to make sense of often the conversations. I help global families and their family offices solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. It's vital for families and their family offices to understand their vulnerabilities and become more resilient so they can mitigate risk and prevail during times of crisis. My experience with some of the world's wealthiest families has allowed me to distill the best practices for discovering purpose, refining vision, governance structures, systems, processes, and culture that successful families and their safeguard family office need to thrive in crisis. I help families create or reinvent their family office to be of institutional quality, yet highly adaptive. Well, we're really excited about today's podcast. It's called Americares CEO, Christine Squires, on making an impact through philanthropy. As you could tell from the title, it gives away who our special guest is, unless you weren't listening, of course, and that would be Christine Squires, CEO of Americares. Why don't we get right to it? Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we're always interested in people in a position like yours as CEO of a significant organization, a non-for-profit, and you were just thrust right into the mix with your new role effectively during the early stages of COVID. So talking about things like leadership, developing company morale, the team, adapting, reinventing during challenging times absolutely applies to families, their family enterprises, and family offices, and how it circles back to philanthropy and giving back. We're going to get to that, but right before we get to the heart of that, I do want to ask you, I think many families have heard of Americares, but they may not really know exactly what Americares does really around the world. If you could explain Americares to our audience, please.
Thank you. I'm happy to do that, Angelo. So Americares, our mission is to save lives and improve health for people affected by poverty and or disaster, because they often intersect, so they can reach their full potential. So we focus on health. And we believe that with good health, anything is possible. Children can attend school, parents can take care of their families, and communities become stronger together. We support more than 4,000 health centers worldwide, including the US, with transformative health projects, and very importantly, donations of medicines, medical supplies, and all of this improves the health of millions of people each year. So some of our programs include, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, helping communities prepare for and respond to emergencies, increase access to critical medicine and medical supplies. We improve and expand clinical services in communities, and we also prevent disease and promote good health in vulnerable communities. So that's hopefully a 60-second description of what Americares does.
Yes, we're going to dive deeper, but that's incredibly helpful. And I think sometimes people have to dig a little deeper to understand the tremendous value of empathy, of giving back for those of us that are more fortunate to those that are less fortunate. But if you look a little deeper from even a governmental perspective, and we had a great guest on in Philanthropy about 2 months ago that reminded me of this and tied it back to how some families that look at things very black and white could understand. And that is how people look at us, meaning in America, around the world, going back to how we fed many people around the world with our being fortunate to be in position to do so, and our philanthropic and wonderful organizations that were launched here in America create goodwill around the world. Really what people want is they want to be healthy and they want to be fed. I mean, if I really, really had to simplify it, I'd probably put education in the big three because you could take yourself out of poverty with that. So let's call those the big three. And America has really been a global leader in that for many, many years. It's ebbed and waned historically, depending on who's in power and a variety of other factors. But in general, it's been something that has been very, very strong for America. The guests that I had on noted, Angelo, we've spoken to four-star generals that talk about, when they're doing the work that they do, the issues that often lead to conflict are often around someone's health and the ability to have food, and the ability for us as a country and really as a world. It's much more, it's the right thing to do, but also it's far less invasive and less costly, longer haul than the alternatives, which are disastrous. And I think sometimes people don't quite put that 1 + 1 = 2 about how a global organization like yours is really more impactful than just in core the three things I noted, but how it reaches deeper than that and has geopolitical perspectives, unfortunately military, although it's maybe a subject we don't like to talk about much, but there's much value from giving. And I would like for our families and those that watch this to understand that and realize it runs a little deeper than it appears on the surface. I will get off of my soapbox now.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I will add a fact just to support how generous we are here in the US, that American citizens have given more than $400 billion annually to charities. And an increasing amount of that is for international work. So just wanted to support what you said there, Angelo.
Wow, I didn't know the numbers were even that high. That's amazing. I know in general, Americans tend to be very, very philanthropic. It's one of the great things about our country and about those that are often in a prosperous position to be able to have resources that they could give back to society and the community. Let's talk a little bit about what I hinted at early on. And I'm going to ask my question first by, this date will be important for people. When did you take your position as CEO of Americares?
March 14th was my first official day.
And that, I mean, I could be a day or two off, but that basically is when New York and our New York area, which is what we're a part of, effectively a suburb of New York City, went into effectively kind of lockdown.
Exactly.
So now we're what, 6 or so months in. So you were thrust right into the challenge of being the leader of a global organization. And again, that ties back to families so they could understand this, especially if they own private businesses, which many of them do. And I mean, you probably, even when you were looking at this situation in December and January, we didn't really quite grasp COVID yet. So this must have hit you very, very hard as well, heading into your acceptance of that position, probably whatever, a week or 2 weeks before then, as you were weighing your decision. How has this changed how you lead, given that you're leading in a time of crisis?
Great questions. I will say that I have been with Americares for 4 years. So fortunately, I was with the organization before being thrust into the CEO position. Actually, I accepted the job in January. There was a transition period, and I will also say, fortunately, being a health organization, an emergency response organization, we have a team that is responsible for preparedness. And the team reached out, early and said, look, even before this was actually named a pandemic, they said, we have to plan for this to be a pandemic, and here are the things we need to consider. And the first consideration for me as CEO was our staff, internal considerations and operational. How do we go remote? How do we protect staff? Are there staff traveling in different countries that have to get back here? So that was the first big challenge. As an organization, we had started, and we are a global organization, so we have staff in Stanford, but also around the world. We had been leaning into remote work. So we had the systems there, and we have an amazing IT department. So that pivot went pretty smoothly. But as a leader of an organization, my first day was leading a distributed and remote workforce for the most part. So that's been a challenge. One of the things, though, that was on my my list of the first things I wanted to do for the organization is to bring us together closer globally. We are a global organization, but because we are, located in Stamford, Connecticut, we were a little headquarter centric. This remote work and distributed work has actually, ironically, brought us all closer together. We have the technology. Everyone's more on an even playing field. And I'm connecting with people throughout the organization more deep than I ever had before. So I have to say a silver lining there is, developing a culture remotely is interesting, but it has brought us closer together.
Yeah, I mean, just talking out loud, and these are some things I hear from family businesses and family offices as well, as we all knew with technology and advancements that trends were heading in this direction, and COVID-19 simply accelerated it. Some people had greater communication technologies in place, whether Slack or other platforms, and project management tools, Trello, and so many others that are so incredibly helpful that maybe unlike other aspects 10, 15, or 20 years ago, we simply have the bandwidth, the Wi-Fi, the technology now to make remote work. And the impetus, and it's a little sad that it happens to be the impetus, but happens to be something like the pandemic that is COVID-19. Staying on that in terms of leadership and developing culture, there's a team that's experienced could adapt to remote work, but onboarding new people and then ingraining them in the culture when they're not interacting with leaders or their team is much, much harder. And recruiting people out of college that probably need some hand-holding and coaching, and now it's going to be far more complex. How have you addressed that?
That's a great question. And yes, we have onboarded a lot of new staff during this remote period. And, we knew we had to think differently. It's not the same of just taking what you do in person and, kind of throwing it online. So we have our onboarding process to make sure that we have lots of opportunities for staff to connect throughout the organization. I think one of the challenges first with remote work is that you work with certain teams. So when you're just connecting on Zoom or on whatever platform, you're kind of working with the same people all the time. Whereas maybe if you're in an office, you bump into people, you have hallway conversations. So we wanted to make sure that we have that cross-functional nature, and we brought that online. So we've done that with our onboarding process. And I have to say, it's gone pretty well. The one big challenge is, for folks who are managing our programs, and we have a lot of folks who are locally based where we work, but not being able to be there in person to see the work. So we're doing what we can, from a virtual nature in that sense.
They say, I guess it goes back to the great Peter Drucker, that you cannot improve what you can't measure. So in terms of coming into a position of leadership during a challenging time of COVID, I'm assuming there's certain big data analytics that you're looking at internally as well as externally and seeing, one, are we effective? That's most important, but it's nice to be, and again, I'm quoting Peter Drucker left and right here, it's great to be effective first, but then to also be efficient. Especially if you need to do more with less, you're onboarding new people, they may need more hand-holding and coaching. I mean, you have a lot of things going on. Have you implemented a certain tactics or technologies to measure results, and how is that playing out now 6 months into COVID?
Sure. I think I'll start with a couple things when you talk about efficiency. So we're talking about remote staff, but not all of our staff is remote. So we have our warehouse, our distribution center, which is located in Stamford, Connecticut, but it ships medicines and medical supplies, including PPE, all over the world. So first thing we had to do was pivot that staff and actually have the staff work on split shifts. We needed them to be safe, socially distant. But their job was still to not only get out the medicines that we deliver all around the world, which are critical, but now an increased load of PPE, including masks and face shields, gloves, gowns, disinfectant supplies. And we've delivered those tons and tons of those supplies to 23 countries. and all over the U.S., 49 states and 3 territories. So I think that was number one with the pivot. So we can measure the number of supplies that we're getting out there, and I think obviously we want to continue to measure long-term health outcomes. I will tell you a story though about there is a community clinic that we support in Chicago, which we were able to get them PPE, especially masks, before we were able to get it to them, because it sounds like just like numbers. Well, we've shipped tons of masks, or not tons of masks, but tons of supplies. And before we were able to get the masks to that clinic, they had 17 masks, and that was it. So without these supplies, they couldn't care for their patients, and they were putting themselves at risks. So, it's just really wonderful and validating and heartening to hear the impact of all of the supplies we've been able to distribute, which is actually thanks to our supporters and our donors. We wouldn't exist without our supporters, and I want to make that clear.
That's for sure. And in terms of Americares being really focused around health, and that involves medicine and from a global perspective, and then COVID-19, which is a health pandemic. Now, yes, admittingly, our current medications are a little bit limited, although not totally ineffective relative to COVID, but looks like we're making great progress. But I think it's important for people to realize the people that are most susceptible to COVID are going to be people that have health conditions. We'll use diabetes as an example. And there are people in the communities that you noted here in this country, in the US, and for sure around the world, where they need their medicine, which will help them be able to get less likely to perhaps get sicker if they do happen to get COVID. So that's a bit of a cycle that you have to start with. And it must be, the pandemic and the health crisis that it's causing must be, causing all new ways of how do we do what we do even better, yet we're a little bit hand-tied given the times.
That's a great observation and question. And, as it pertains to the US, we support 1,000 safety net clinics that provide care to 7 million patients. And the main support is medicines and medical supplies, but also training, education. So if you think about in the US context, there are now more than 5 million people who are newly unemployed, who are now maybe underinsured or uninsured. So the strain on those clinics is going to become worse. And those clinics have also, their budgets are constrained. Their funding of those clinics has been very challenging this time. So that's where Americares comes in. Providing these medicines, which are donated, relieves their budgets. And also we've been providing cash support where we can to keep the clinics going on their feet. And also we talk about essential workers. Obviously there's health workers, but there's other essential workers who depend on these clinics, who need to get food, as you talked about. They need to get cash to provide food and gas. So we've been also pivoting to providing some cash vouchers where we can to support the patients of the clinics.
And a question that has a chance to make you a little uncomfortable. How could I phrase this properly? We could rely on more and more government, and I did emphasize that word there, government programs to be of value and help. And I understand there are times when the government needs to step up and protect its people. It's probably its number one goal. I understand that. But let's face it, there's incredible bureaucracy in government. Many of us feel that we're overtaxed already, and we have a tremendous burden. I suppose I could say that an advantage of a non-for-profit, an organization like Americares, is it basically is independent. It's supported by, of course, corporations, but free market enterprises, people, individuals, families, corporations, foundations. And it is more nimble than falling under the auspice of a government entity. Just look at the technology that a lot of our government has. I remember hearing claims about the checks being mailed out, 1 million going to the wrong people. And it's a laborious system that is built around technology that often is 20, 30 years old. Whereas an organization like yours and others could effectively be more nimble. They're held more accountable, and you're the CEO. Rather bluntly, even though it's a non-for-profit, if you're not doing your job, then you'll be replaced. Where in the government, there's a level of safety and mediocrity, I guess I'm going to put it. I don't mean to be knocking the government. Again, they do provide specific functions, mainly around protecting the people. I get it. But the fact of that families and companies with the resources, they need to step up. The government's not enough, and they need to contribute to organizations like yours that provide real world value to people. And yes, like I started off with, it does impact from a geopolitical perspective around the world. A little bit of a commentary, but if you'd like to comment on my comment, that would be great.
I appreciate your comment. I thank you for making my pitch for me for support. Very well said. But I will say that your point about being nimble is really important. And it's Americares, but it's a lot of non-governmental organizations that people all over the world in need depend on. And it takes a village. It takes a lot of us to work together to do this. So I appreciate your comment.
And going a little bit back in your career, so I could tie it in, you're obviously educated, you had opportunities, and maybe you were in more quote unquote corporate America. What led you to be involved in a philanthropic organization? You mentioned you were with Americares for a number of years, and I'm not sure if with a non-for-profit pre that, but when did you enter into the world of non-for-profits and philanthropy?
Sure. Almost 25 years ago. So I started my nonprofit career working for UNICEF USA. And I was there for 10 years and then moved through other organizations. And I decidedly made that choice. I actually started working out of college in the retail industry. And, while that was really great experience, I had a moment where I thought to myself, is this really, what I want to do? I thought back up to my upbringing. Always, my parents instilled good values, volunteering in me. And I happened to have a boss at the time who I was just honest with about this, who worked in retail. And she said, and she was actually at the end of her career, she said, you know what, you're young, figure out what you want to do and go do it. So I always think about her and as a mentor, as where I am now. If it weren't for her giving me that support and encouragement to just follow my heart and where I want to go, I wouldn't be here today. So that's a little bit about how I got to where I am.
Excellent. No, that's very helpful to understand a little bit of your perspective. Looking forward, we get past COVID-19, whether it's next year, the year after, and let's not even get into other potential COVID-19 situations that could arise again. Although I guess we could argue we, in theory, should be more prepared. There's so many talented bio entrepreneurs working on where this could all be handled probably far more rapidly and efficiently in the future. We could save that one for a bit of a different time. But the bigger picture question is looking even 3 to 5 years out. What do you think is going to be the future of organizations like yours and philanthropy in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for organizations like mine, I think, COVID will change a lot and things just won't go back to the way they were. So, looking on maybe the positive side of the opportunities, what did this change? We talked about remote work and I think there could be positives there. But the other thing from a health perspective is without the ability to, when communities are in lockdown and sometimes you can't see face-to-face, telehealth has really become more important. At Americares, we were able to pivot to telehealth pretty quickly for our 4 free and charitable clinics that we run here in Connecticut. And then in other situations in India, a bit in Colombia. And you need to see patients, but I think telehealth offers an opportunity to maybe reach more deeply into communities and to provide that access point. So I think that's, for Americares, that's something we want to look further at. And how do we do that? How do we support clinics who are looking to pivot to telehealth and provide that connection? Mental health and psychosocial support is something else that Americares also does. Within the COVID perspective, we support health workers to make sure they take care of themselves. It's like putting on your own mask first, right? If you're on an airplane, so you can help others. That mental health and psychosocial support being available through again, telehealth is another area I think of opportunity. So that's what I think the game changers are. And as far as Americares, we want to continue to lean in to make sure that we are able to support local health centers and communities that to provide access to quality health care.
Yeah, you bring up some good points. I forgot to even mention the fact of the impact of COVID from a mental health perspective. And these are often things that families and people don't talk about. But certainly the topsy-turvy of the world is mental health issues, even for families of wealth. I mean, I see it. Okay, their basic needs in terms of shelter and food are met, but there's a variety of factors that placate into just how their brain functions, to simply the isolation that they may be going through. And these are all grave challenges where if people are not getting the support they need, I mean, that's going to be probably equally every bit as devastating as the physical aspects of the illness. And we don't talk about that enough for a variety of reasons. It's a little bit uncomfortable for people, but it's just a reality. It's true. And if your organization is being beneficial from that perspective, and that's under the auspice of health, so of course you are,
Yes.
That's even more valuable in terms of what you're doing, especially now during COVID times. Going a little bit back to what was your passion, your purpose, and led you into philanthropy, when you're onboarding, and I'm assuming wanting both potentially talented employees and possibly volunteers, what do you look for when it gets a little bit in your lap to make a decision, or simply what you recommend to your team when they need to make a decision in terms of what they're looking for from a person that may have options? So it's not like this is the only availability to them. Besides money, and usually working for a non-for-profit is not going to be the pull of great money. What do you look for in the right people and the hiring decisions that you make?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, experience is important. So I look for, it depends on sort of what, function we're talking about, but, somebody who, if we're talking about someone who's got some past experience and, not someone out of college, who can bring experience from a different organization and can add something to how we're thinking at Americares and add value there. Passion for the mission, that comes through very loud and clear, in an interview process. And now everyone's more skilled at phone interviews and Zoom. So, that's no longer a barrier. And I think, someone who promotes and understands and embraces Americare's values, which are, being accountable, being collaborative, and also, somebody who can pivot and be nimble.
And in terms of the listeners people in corporate America, people successful in finance, families as wealth creators, as inheritors, and those in the family office community, broadly people that generally are on the more successful front. So in theory, they have the resources and the capabilities. How could they look at giving to non-for-profits, charity, and being active in terms of wanting to give back to the community? And some of the reasons we already spoke about, the importance of health, and even globally a geopolitical perspective. But if you had to add to that, I guess I'm almost asking, why should they care, and why does their time and dollars really count and is appreciated?
Sure. I think you said, well, why should they care? Because this is all tied together. So, a productive community, a healthy community leads to a healthy economy. So I think that's number one. I think when choosing who to donate to, you have to look at, your family, what your passions are, where you want to make an impact. I think it's important to look at efficiency and impact. And actually Charity Navigator is a good resource to do that if you're ever looking. So I would make those points as well. And there's a lot of great organizations out there doing a lot of great work. I know one thing I will say about Americares is, we talked about medicines and medical supplies. And what's unique about our model is that the support that families give to Americares, so we get those medicines, medical supplies donated to us from pharmaceutical companies. We have partners, about 200 partners that give those to us, and we ship them all over the world. And so if you think about, and that's where, we need funding to do that because that's expensive. But, when you're giving to Americares, that leverage, you're leveraging that donated medicines and medical supplies to get to these health centers that need them.
And I guess I spoke earlier about you can't improve what you can't measure. I'm making the assumption, I don't know, I didn't look up the statistics, but now that we're enough time in, 6 months into COVID, and perhaps because people feel more of not knowing what's around the corner, has charitable contributions, not specifically with Americares, but broadly in non-for-profit and philanthropic organizations, has the money been less during COVID than pre-COVID? I'm making that assumption is probably yes.
Yeah, the answer is really depends on what sector you're talking about. So we have seen here in the US incredible support of the COVID response work. I know that from Americares and also my colleague organization. So that's been strong. I think other organizations that maybe aren't, focused on COVID related, whether it's, so I think organizations that are making sure providing food, and organizations focused on education, I think are doing okay. Maybe others are not. The worry for me and my colleagues I talk with is next year and months following, as the economy fluctuates. Typically, I mean, it's not a perfect comparison by any rate, but the 2008 recession, nonprofit organizations saw a decline about a year later. So that's been the pattern. So, we're fortunate at Americares to have great support, but we're being very careful about how we plan out the next year so we can make sure that we continue to make an impact with the donations that we have.
And perhaps a final question, if you had to, discussing with our audience, the kind of people, as I noted, that will view this or listen to it, and motivate's not the right word, but encourage them to give, whether it's to Americares or to another organization, the value of giving and philanthropy, because you went into it as a passion 25 plus years ago. But if you had to leave our audience with some comments about how appreciated and how important it is for people to help our fellow person in society in this country and really around the world, and how their dollars, and you're right about Charity Navigator, really seeing that a good percentage of your money literally goes to help people. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think the best answer to that question is, hearing directly from somebody's life who you've impacted, and what that means to them. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So, obviously about Hurricane Laura. So Americares responds to natural disasters, and there's a clinic that we partner with in Lake Charles. And the head of that clinic, so we've supported them for many, many years. That clinic serves a community that, again, is hit over and over with these disasters. And, this community, many of them are not living in great economic circumstances. And the woman who runs this clinic is so dedicated that when the hurricane was coming, she actually stayed and slept in the clinic just to do whatever she could to make sure that it was still going to be whole, because she knew that she was going to have a lot of people to care for. And the roof actually in part of the clinic was ripped off. Americares will go in and help and repair that. But also one of the things she wanted to make sure is that the medicines that she had were safe and contained. So again, she could reach out to the community, and just hearing her story and just saying, whatever, she just knows that Americares or other donors were there to support her and will be there to support her afterwards. So I think there's just no better I guess, gratification by just knowing that you're going to impact someone's life, and you have.
For sure. And no disrespect to the non-for-profits or Americares, but effectively they're an effective and efficient middle person. But the people that are giving the money are really, in the end, helping, again, their fellow man in society, and from a variety of perspectives that we went into, which is very, very hard to do one-off and individually. And to have an organization like Americares and others that really have great leadership and are doing good is a good thing to know. For those families and people, whoever it may be, that would like to learn more about Americares, what's a website and how could they learn how they could contribute time or money?
Thank you. So the website is americares.org. And there are many ways to contribute money, time, and really hope that you do check it out and engage with us. We've been doing this for 41 years, and we're going to be here for the long haul.
And that's Americares, AMERICARES.org, correct?
That's correct.
And I know in today's world, especially with younger audiences, and probably a little bit of a focus is attracting younger families of wealth and even younger donors into organizations like yours. Do you guys happen to have an Instagram and social media accounts as well?
We do. We have Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And we also actually, for anyone who's local, have something called a junior council, where we have, and they're often, sometimes they're children of donors or board members who've been around, but attracting sort of younger folks and understanding the organization. The junior council gets together and understands more about Americares and helps us raise funds in our profile.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's very good to know, especially those that may be a little more local in the greater New York City area, probably even more specifically in Fairfield County and Connecticut. And certainly there's enough families of great wealth here that a lot of their children, their grandchildren do want to be active and do want to help. And that would be a great way for them to potentially, more adult children, but potentially be interactive from that perspective as well. Well, Christine Squires, CEO of Americares, thank you so much. It was really great to do this kind of dialogue today. Again, I think it's really, really important that organizations like ours that have people, companies, etc., families that have the resources, that they give back. Again, because we do know that governments could be incredibly inefficient, and organizations that are run well like Americares is a great way to help in society. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles podcast and founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of wealth and their family offices. You could check out our new website, FamilyOfficeAssociation.com, and my email is angelo@FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. And I'm also very active, including Instagram, but on social media. So check us out and follow us there as well. Thank you so much. And Christine, thank you for being a great guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelo. And thank you everyone for listening and for your support.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.